So here we are in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and we know that there is a deep social motivation for corporate social responsibility. We don't need to be told that we need to be engaging in corporate social responsibility. We understand that firms, companies, play a vital role in social growth, but yet we're bombarded with all these logos, names, procedures, organizations, these standards. And I'm expanding the definition a little bit of standards beyond what Ms. Assia said. I'm including standards, it's not just international standards, but standards across countries, even private standards. So how do we make sense of all these standards? And most importantly, are they relevant to us? Well, let's step back a little bit and understand what standards are and why they came to be. I'll say that there are two types of standards. The first type is one that we're all very familiar with, the law. When a government sets the law, that becomes a de facto standard. Everybody starts following that standard of behavior. But when the government doesn't set a law, and there's a social issue that people care about, what do? Even states are now engaged in developing standards. Now you say, well, states can develop laws. Why do they get involved in the business of standards? Well, they do this at the international level when, as you know, there is no international law. And when we want to try to encourage changed behavior, states get together and they form organizations and set standards. And then some countries will take these standards and adopt them as law. Others won't. Some companies will take these standards and follow them, and others won't. But the point is, they can't force this upon people. They're trying to encourage it. Beyond states, companies now get into the business of developing their own standards. They've been doing this for about 20, 25 years. And when it first started, it was called industry self-regulation. And that was what they called corporate social responsibility, what the scholars called corporate social responsibility, before they believed that corporations actually could care. Now companies develop standards to, one, develop a standard before the government sets the law so that they can design the standard for their own benefit, right? So that it aligns with their business. And two, if you look at some of the labels, I forgot my prop, my bottled water has a list of standards on the bottle. And I encourage you, when you go to the supermarket, pick up any food item and turn it around and you'll see standards. There are standards that enable us to put a brand within a brand, and so companies can actually show some level of legitimacy in their products. Now, beyond companies, nonprofit organizations also get into the business of developing standards. When states don't set laws, when companies don't set their own standards, and yet there's an important social issue that needs to be taken care of, non-for-profit organizations step in. And like governments, non-for-profit organizations they're social organizations. They live to promote a social cause. So they develop standards and then work with governments and companies in order to change behavior. In addition to these three separate groups of standards, there are also standards that are created in collaboration between companies and non-for-profit organizations and states. And here we have just a pile of different standards. Companies work with non-for-profit organizations to increase their legitimacy. Non-for-profit organizations work with companies because they learn that it's better to cooperate with them than to compete with them. And the best way to really affect change is to work with companies. And both non-for-profit organizations and companies work with states in order to increase their scope and power. But what we're left with is a pile of standards across the globe. How do we make sense of it all? How do we know what's relevant for us? Let's step back and look at the numbers for a second. There are actually, if you expand the scope of standards and include national, subnational, private, transnational, and international standards, there are over 400 different standards and standards organizations. About 58% of them, nonprofit. 8% come from governments. This is the amazing thing. 18% are for-profit organizations. And I don't mean companies like Shell or Saudi Aramco or Coca-Cola. I mean private companies that have decided that they could make money off developing standards and charging a fee for companies to use them. Companies then take the standard and put it on their product, right? And 16% is other. What I mean by other is oftentimes companies get together and they develop industry associations. That's an example of other, sort of doesn't fit in the other categories. Almost two-thirds, actually, exactly two-thirds of them fit under larger international organizations like the ones Ms. Assia had noted, ISO, Fair Label Organization, Global Compact. And almost half of them are in the business of, are now, as we speak, developing new standards. So everything is moving. Well, what does that mean for us? Well, I'm going to make a couple of bold statements. I'm going to make one bold statement, and then the two will follow from the bold statement. And the first statement is there are no standards for standards. We can't look at standards and expect to know exactly how to behave. It doesn't mean that if there's a standard out there, like Ms. Assia said, that it applies to KSA, that it applies to our companies. In fact, what you see in the standards world is a little marketplace of standards. Standards are competing against each other.